One evening, a woman who ran a ranch set out to herd cattle on her Texas spread. It was a familiar job she'd handled time and again, but this time, she didn't make it back. For 9 long years, her vanishing act stayed a baffling enigma, with no hint of her or her pickup truck. Then, out of nowhere, an oil crew drilling in the desolate desert hit something metal buried deep down. When they hauled it up, it blew open a mystery that had weighed heavy on her family for nearly a decade. The relentless afternoon sun scorched the Harris Ranch, painting long shadows across the arid Texas plains. James Harris, his rough hands coated in engine grease, was tinkering with the motor of his vintage Massey Ferguson tractor inside the tool barn. At 62, he'd gotten the hang of fixing most things himself. It kept costs down and gave him something to focus on. The ranch had been quieter, almost ghostly, these past 9 years since Olivia went missing. He was tightening a gear when the sharp sound of tires grinding gravel hit his ears. Glancing through the barn's open door, he caught sight of a sheriff's cruiser stirring up a cloud of dust as it rolled toward the main house. James snatched a cloth from his back pocket, scrubbing the grime off his hands as best he could. It had been a good while since the cops had swung by about Olivia's case. That first year, they were practically regulars. By year 3, they'd stopped showing up altogether. He stepped outside to meet them, squinting against the blazing Texas sun. 2 deputies climbed out of the cruiser, one he knew as Deputy Thompson, the other a younger guy he hadn't met. "Afternoon, deputies," James called, still working the rag in his hands. "What's brought you all the way out here?" Deputy Thompson doffed his hat, a move that instantly put James on guard. It was rarely a good omen. "Mr. Harris, we've got something important to discuss. We've uncovered a lead." "A lead?" James's chest tightened with a mix of hope and dread. "We're pretty sure we've found the truck your daughter was driving when she disappeared." James let out a sharp, disbelieving scoff. 9 years later? Where'd it turn up? At the bottom of the Pecos River? The deputies exchanged a quick look, but Thompson's face stayed stone-cold serious. "No, sir. It was buried deep under the desert ground, just outside the old Marfa ghost town." "Buried?" James shook his head, struggling to wrap his mind around it. "That's flat out wild. You're telling me somebody hid a whole truck underground? An oil crew stumbled on it?" The younger deputy spoke up. They were setting up a new drill site at a forgotten well. When they started boring down, they struck metal. "Turns out, it was your daughter's truck." James stared at them, the rag slipping from his grip. The sheer craziness of it hit him hard, but the deputies' grim faces made it clear this wasn't a prank. "That's tough to swallow," he muttered, his voice softening as the weight sank in. "We need you to come with us, Mr. Harris," Thompson said gently. "We'd like you to verify the truck, make sure it's the one Olivia was using. It's evidence now." James nodded slowly, his thoughts racing like a runaway horse. "Give me a sec to lock things down here." He turned and shouted to Carlos, his ranch foreman, who was working in a nearby field. "Carlos, I need you to hold down the fort. I've gotta head out with these deputies." Carlos jogged over, concern creasing his face as he took in the scene. "Everything all right, boss?" "They found Olivia's truck," James said under his breath. "I'll be back as soon as I can." James slid into the back of the cruiser, his mind buzzing with questions. The drive to the site took about an hour and a half, snaking through the stark desert terrain he knew like the back of his hand. As they neared Marfa, he could see a flurry of activity in the distance: cop cars, state troopers, and what looked like a full-blown drilling setup. When they pulled up to the desert site, James was struck by the controlled mayhem. Cops and oil workers milled about, yellow tape cordoning off the area. At the heart of it all was a battered pickup truck, streaked with rust and caked in dirt, dangling from a crane's heavy chains. Behind it yawned a massive pit where the drilling rig had broken through. James stepped out of the cruiser, his legs shaky on the sandy earth. A man in a suit approached, Detective Alvarez, a state police officer who'd worked on Olivia's case early on. "Mr. Harris," Alvarez said, offering a handshake. "I wish we were reuniting under better circumstances." "Detective," James replied, gripping his hand, though his eyes were glued to the truck. Alvarez led him toward a stocky man wearing an oil company hard hat. "This is Tom Bradley from West Texas Drilling. Tom, fill Mr. Harris in on what you told us." Bradley cleared his throat, adjusting his hat. "Well, sir, our maps marked this spot as an old drilling site from the 60s, long out of use. When my crew got here this morning, we found a huge boulder sitting right where the old wellhead should have been. That struck us as odd. Abandoned wells are usually just sealed and flagged, not covered with giant rocks." James gave a slight nod, trying to focus on Bradley's words, though his gaze kept drifting to the truck. "We shifted the boulder and ran our usual ground scans, but something, maybe old gear, messed with the readings, so we didn't pick up anything strange. We started drilling to reopen the well, and about 15 feet down, we hit something solid, definitely not rock or dirt. The rig operator knew right away we'd hit trouble." "So you excavated it?" James asked, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "Had to. Our equipment couldn't tell what was down there. It took 3 hours of careful digging with the backhoe to uncover it. The second we realized it was a vehicle, we called the cops. I mean, who buries a truck in an oil well unless they're trying to keep it hidden?" James edged closer to the truck. Despite nearly a decade underground, it was in surprisingly good shape. The desert's dry air had preserved it better than he'd have guessed, though rust had eaten into the chassis and wheel wells. The front windshield was smashed where the drill had punched through. "Somebody went out of their way to stash this here," James said, his voice taut with certainty. "This is nowhere near Olivia's usual path. She'd never have driven close to an oil well." Detective Alvarez nodded in agreement. "We didn't find any human remains in or near the vehicle, but this is definitely a crime scene. Whoever did this put in serious effort to conceal that truck." "Can I take a look at what was inside?" James asked, his tone heavy with anticipation. Alvarez guided him to a nearby makeshift tent. Under the stark glow of portable lights, a folding table held evidence bags, each carefully tagged and photographed. James's breath hitched as he spotted Olivia's belongings, her leather wallet with a turquoise clasp, a scrunchie with strands of her dark hair tangled in it, and the delicate silver cross necklace that once belonged to her mother. "Those are hers," James said, his voice rough with emotion. He pointed to a multi-tool. "That's mine. I gave it to her for emergencies." His fingers shifted to a tire pressure gauge. "That's mine too. Told her to keep it in the glove box." A stir near the site's entrance pulled their attention. Sheriff Daniel Boone's SUV rolled up, kicking up a swirl of dust. The sheriff stepped out, adjusting his Stetson as he surveyed the scene. Detective Alvarez and James walked over to greet him. "Sorry I'm late," Sheriff Boone said, catching his breath. "Got tied up with a wreck out on Highway 90, a 3-car crash. Had to wait for the state troopers to take over." "No worries," Alvarez replied. Sheriff Boone turned to James, his face softening with sympathy. "James, I'm truly sorry about this. I know we've been searching for 9 years, and to finally stumble on something like this. It's a start that we found the truck, James said cautiously. But my daughter's still out there somewhere. We don't know if she's alive or gone, safe or in pain. This truck doesn't give us those answers. What about DNA evidence? James asked Alvarez. Could there be something in there that tells us what happened? Our forensics team has gathered everything they could, Alvarez reassured him. Hair strands, possible blood traces from the seats, any fingerprints that might have survived. It'll take at least a few days to process it all in the lab. Bradley, the oil company supervisor, approached the sheriff. Sheriff Boone, can we get back to work in the surrounding area? We've got deadlines to meet. Not a chance, Boone said firmly. This is a crime scene now. I'm widening the restricted zone. We'll bring in a dig team to comb the area, see if anything else is buried out here. Alvarez glanced at his phone. I've got to head back to the station to go over the case files again with this new find. I'll give James a ride home, Sheriff Boone offered. There's something I need to talk over with him anyway. James glanced between the two men, then gave a nod. He followed the sheriff to his SUV, casting one final look at the truck that had been hidden for 9 years. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Boone focused on the road while James gazed out at the familiar desert scenery. When they pulled up to the farmhouse, Boone killed the engine and turned to James. Can we step into your office for a bit? There's a few things we need to hash out. James gave a nod and guided Sheriff Boone through the house to his modest office tucked in the back. The space was no frills, a desk buried under ranch documents, a metal filing cabinet, a couple of chairs, and walls decorated with snapshots from livestock fairs, plus a striking photo of Olivia astride her horse, snapped just months before she went missing. Sheriff Boone settled into the seat across from the desk, flipping open a small notepad. He clicked his pen a few times before speaking. James, I need you to run me through that night one more time. I know it's been years, and the trail went cold by year 3, but this new find means we've got to dig into everything again. James eased back in his chair, hands folded tightly in front of him. I've gone over this story more times than I can count, Daniel. I get it, but humor me and tell it again. James drew a deep breath, steadying himself. Olivia was out herding cattle that evening, same as she often did. She'd usually head out around 8 p.m. in her truck. It's about a 45-minute drive from here to the western grazing fields. She preferred working late to steer clear of the neighboring ranch. They share water sources sometimes, and she liked to avoid any tussles. Boone jotted down notes, his pen scratching the paper. Keep going. I was here wrapping up some paperwork when she wasn't back by 11 o'clock. I drove out to check on her. It was pitch dark by then. The cattle were still grazing where they should be, but there was no trace of Olivia or her truck. I didn't panic right away. James's voice softened, heavy with memory. She was 28, Daniel, a tough, self-reliant woman who knew this land inside out. I thought maybe her truck broke down, and she hitched a ride or decided to camp out there. She'd done that before. But she never showed up. When I woke up the next morning and she still wasn't home, that's when I rang you all. James's jaw clenched tight. I've carried that guilt every day since. If I'd called you that night instead of waiting till dawn, maybe whatever happened could have been stopped. Sheriff Boone scribbled more, then looked up with a face James couldn't quite read. You said you hit the sack. What time was that? About midnight, after I got back from checking the grazing land. And you were here by yourself? Carlos and the other workers had gone home. They don't stay on the ranch. Boone leaned closer, his tone sharpening. "James, where were you exactly between 8 p.m. and when you went looking for her?" James's brow furrowed. "Like I said, I was right here in this office." "Can anybody back that up?" "What?" James sat up straighter, his voice rising. "Why the hell would I need someone to confirm that? When exactly did you head out to look for her? And why didn't you search harder or call us right then and there?" The questions came rapid fire now, Boone's voice turning from casual to probing. James felt a flush of anger creeping up his neck. "Daniel, what's this nonsense about? You're way off base. I didn't snatch my own daughter. Why on earth would I?" "I'm not saying you took her," Boone replied coolly. "But we've got to cover every angle. In cases like these, sometimes family members play a part. You're barking up the wrong tree if you think I'm involved." James's tone was iron-hard now. "I was here from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m., sorting through ranch finances. Then I drove to the grazing land, spent an hour looking around, and came back. And even if I'd wanted to, which is ludicrous, I'm 62 years old. You think I could bury a truck under heaps of desert dirt in one night without a soul noticing, without leaving a trace? Without anyone spotting me?" Boone kept writing. "What about your ranch crew? Where were they that night?" James slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing in the small room. "Now you're dragging my whole operation into this. Carlos has been with me for 20 years. The other guys are solid." "I want to talk to them again," Boone said. James shot back, "With all due respect, Sheriff, I've got no respect for what you're pulling right now. You're wasting time chasing ghosts instead of real clues." James leaned in, his eyes locked on Boone's. "You want to do something worthwhile? Pull the security footage from the roads around Marfa and nearby towns from that night. Look for big rigs, heavy machinery, something that could have shifted enough dirt to hide a pickup." Boone shook his head dismissively. "That's not where we're at yet, and we'd need to loop in Marfa's department." "I know how to handle this, James." "Do you really?" James stood, his voice thick with frustration. "Because it sure seems like you're keener on pinning this on me than figuring out who actually buried that truck." Boone rose, snapping his notebook shut. "I'm just following the playbook." "Then take your playbook and use it somewhere else. Check those cameras. Ask the oil company who knew about that well. Do some real police work." James strode to the door. "We're through here. If you need to talk again, it'll be at the station with Detective Alvarez there." He led Boone out of the house, watching as the sheriff climbed into his SUV. No handshake, no small talk. Boone's tires churned up dust as he peeled out, leaving James on the porch, hands balled into fists. The man tasked with finding his daughter had just grilled him like a criminal. After 9 years of dead ends, they finally had a solid lead, and Daniel Boone was squandering it by playing interrogator instead of chasing it down. Once Boone's SUV vanished down the ranch road, James lingered on the porch, trying to cool his simmering rage. He glanced at the clock through the window, 4 p.m. The afternoon heat was stifling, and his throat felt dry as sand after all that arguing. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He walked over to the tool barn where Carlos was sorting gear. "I'm stepping out for a bit," James called. "You boys know what's gotta be done." Carlos glanced up, worry etched on his face. "You holding up, boss?" "Just need to clear my head. I'll swing back later." James hopped into his pickup and drove toward town. On the road, he let out a bitter chuckle, thinking about Boone's wild idea that his ranch hands might have helped bury Olivia's truck. The sheer ridiculousness of it stoked his anger all over again. The Rusty Horseshoe Bar sat just off the highway, a 15-minute drive from the ranch. It was a local staple, swinging its doors open at 4 p.m. for ranchers and oil workers wrapping up their shifts. James pulled into the gravel lot, spotting just a few trucks parked at this early hour. Inside, the air conditioning was a welcome reprieve. He slid onto a bar stool facing Mike, the bartender who'd been slinging drinks here for longer than most could recall. "Whiskey, straight, and whatever sandwich you've got prepped," James said. Mike gave a nod and glanced at the TV in the corner. The local news was airing footage of the drilling site, showing the truck being hoisted from the pit. "James, I caught the news." "Is that really?" "Don't even go there," James cut him off. "I'm already up to my neck in stress. Just here to take a breather." Mike threw up his hands in a peace gesture and grabbed the remote, flipping the channel to a sports highlight reel. "Hey," a voice barked from a table in the back. "Why'd you switch it?" "I was watching that." "Sorry 'bout that," Mike muttered to James, looking sheepish. The guy who'd griped stood and sauntered to the bar, claiming a stool one over from James. He looked younger, maybe mid-40s, with the weary vibe of someone who'd been on the road for hours. He kept shooting annoyed glances at the TV, now showing a football recap. James eyed him while nursing his whiskey. The guy's fixation on the news story seemed strange for an outsider. After a moment, James decided to break the ice. "You local? Don't think I've seen you around." The man turned, looking almost relieved to chat. "Nah, just rolled in. Drove all the way from New Mexico." He stuck out his hand. "Ethan Carter." James shook it. "James Harris. What's got you in Alpine?" "Trying to track down my brother, actually. Ryan Carter. He was a cop here. Or used to be, at least." James nearly sputtered on his drink. "Ryan Carter from Traffic Patrol. That's the one. You know Ryan." Ethan's face brightened with hope. "We crossed paths on a case way back." James nodded vaguely toward the TV. "That truck they dug up. It was mine. Olivia was driving it when she went missing." Ethan's face fell. "God, I'm so sorry. I had no clue." No wonder Mike switched the channel. James brushed off the apology. "It's all good, but why re you out here solo? Where's Ryan?" "That's the problem, I can't find him." Ethan's frustration spilled out. "I've been in Alpine for 2 days. Went to the police station, but they said Ryan quit 9 years ago. Nobody knows where he ended up." 9 years ago? James's eyes narrowed, his mind ticking back. "Same time my sister vanished with that truck. Hang on, I think I heard someone say Ryan moved to Mexico." "Mexico?" Ethan looked floored. "He never told me a thing. Why would he just up and leave without a word?" They sat quietly for a beat, James mulling over the coincidence. Ryan had been one of the officers pulling traffic camera footage during the early days of Olivia's case. He'd been helpful, or so it seemed. "Did Ryan ever say anything to you about my sister's case?" James asked. Ethan shook his head. "We weren't exactly close. Hardly spoke after our parents passed. Things got messy between us." He stared into his beer. "My life was a wreck back then, but I'm getting it together now. Wanted to patch things up with him. Problem is, nobody knows where he's at." Somebody at the station's gotta have something, James said. I know a few folks there. Detective Alvarez has been on my case. He'd likely know if Ryan really took off for Mexico. I appreciate the thought, but you've got enough on your plate, Ethan said. I don't want to pile on. It's no trouble. James downed the last of his whiskey as the TV flipped to a weather report. Look, you're hunting for your brother, and I've got to touch base with the detective anyway after my clash with the sheriff. Mike slid the check over, but Ethan snatched it before James could grab his wallet. My treat, Ethan said. Thanks. James stood, stretching. You got wheels? Nope. Took a cab from my motel. Then hop in with me. The station's just down the road. We'll see what Alvarez knows about Ryan. Ethan's relief was clear as day. Thanks, man. Seriously. They stepped out of the bar into the oppressive late afternoon heat. As James unlocked his truck, a gnawing suspicion tugged at him. Ryan's sudden exit 9 years ago, right around when Olivia disappeared, felt like more than just chance. The Alpine Sheriff's Office was a plain brick building that had stood since the 70s, serving the small community through decades of dust and drama. James pulled into the visitor lot, noticing it was busier than when he'd swung by the drilling site earlier that day. He and Ethan pushed through the glass doors into the lobby. Behind the front desk was Officer Sarah Mitchell, a familiar face since her rookie days. She glanced up from her computer, her professional smile wavering slightly when she spotted James. Mr. Harris, you're back already today. Sarah, I need to talk to Detective Alvarez. Is he around? She glanced at her monitor. He stepped out maybe an hour ago, but I can reach out if it's urgent. James nodded toward Ethan. This is Ethan Carter. He's trying to find his brother, Officer Ryan Carter. I'm lending him a hand. Sarah's face lit up with recognition as she looked at Ethan. Right, Mr. Carter, you stopped by yesterday about Officer Carter. Her tone was patient, practiced. Like I said then, we don't have any current info on him. He left the department 9 years back. I know, Ethan replied, but I was hoping someone might shed light on why he quit or where he headed. Sarah shook her head, her expression soft with sympathy. The only folks who might know are Detective Alvarez or Sheriff Boone. They were around when Officer Carter took off. James's jaw tightened at the mention of Boone, his mind flashing to their tense showdown earlier that day. Still, he pressed, is the sheriff in his office now? He's not back yet, but he should be here soon. He doesn't usually stray far from the station, especially with all this going on. Ethan touched James's arm lightly. Hey, you've done more than enough for me. Let's head out. I'll figure this out on my own somehow. But Sarah was already pointing out the window. Hold on, that's him pulling up now. Told you he'd be quick. James and Ethan moved toward the exit to catch the sheriff. Through the glass doors, they saw Sheriff Boone's SUV slide into a parking spot a few spaces from James's truck. They stepped into the sweltering afternoon heat, expecting Boone to hop out right away. But he stayed put. Through the tinted windows, they could make out his silhouette, clearly on a phone call. They lingered awkwardly by the station's entrance, waiting. Maybe we should head back inside, Ethan suggested after a moment. I've got to grab something from my truck anyway, James said. My phone charger, battery's been draining all day with these calls. He crossed the lot, digging his keys from his pocket. Boone's SUV was parked with its windows slightly down for air, and as James passed behind it, the sheriff's voice floated out on the warm breeze. He didn't mean to listen, but the words cut through the quiet lot. Take care of it fast, Boone was saying. Bones? Yeah. Track down Bones. James fumbled with his keys, trying to stay focused on his task. Boone was probably talking about some other case. Sheriffs had a whole county to wrangle, after all. Nah, I'm not skipping town. Alright, fine. The voice on the car's speaker was faint, just a thin male tone replying to Boone. James felt a twinge of second-hand embarrassment for the sheriff, who likely didn't realize how his voice carried. He'd mention it later, discreetly, to save Boone the trouble. James popped his truck door open and reached for the charger in the console. He was about to turn back when more words drifted from Boone's SUV. Not Ryan Carter, no. Nobody's worried about him. Relax. There's a new guy at the station. Yeah. James froze, his hand still on the door. Ryan Carter. Why was Boone talking about Ethan's missing brother? The sheriff's engine suddenly growled to life. James looked up as the SUV started backing out. Ethan was hustling over from the station entrance. Is that Boone? He's taking off again. James's mind was spinning, Boone mentioning Bones, urging someone to act fast, and now Ryan Carter's name. Something was seriously off. Get in the truck, James said, his voice sharp with urgency. What? Why? I heard something I wasn't meant to. Come on, get in. Ethan didn't push back. They both scrambled into James's truck, and he fired up the engine, peeling out of the lot just as Boone's SUV swung onto the main road. What did you hear? Ethan asked, his voice tight as they trailed at a distance. Your brother's name, James said, gripping the wheel hard. Boone was talking about Ryan Carter. Said nobody cares about him. Ethan's face drained of color. What else? Something about Bones and dealing with something quick. Ethan, this ain't sitting right. Your brother disappeared right around when my sister did. Boone showed up at my place accusing me of snatching my own kid, and now he's having hushed talks about your brother. Something's wrong here. They drove in heavy silence, both grappling with the weight of what James had overheard. James kept a safe gap behind Boone's SUV, blending into the thinning evening traffic. The sheriff was pushing the speed limit, weaving past the few cars on the road with a haste that only deepened James's unease. He's driving like he's racing to something big, Ethan noted, clutching the door handle as James sped up to keep pace. Or trying to beat someone else to it, James muttered under his breath. I'm gonna try calling him, James said, fishing out his phone while steering with one hand. Maybe there's a simple explanation. He dialed Boone's number. From the distance, he saw the sheriff glance at his phone, then set it aside. The call rolled to voicemail. He's dodging me, James said, his voice edged with frustration. As they topped a small rise, James could see Boone was still on his call, gesturing with one hand as he spoke. Try Alvarez, Ethan suggested. James punched in the detective's number, switching to speaker as it connected. James, Alvarez answered. I'm guessing this is about the drilling site. We're moving as fast as we can with the evidence. No, hold up, James cut in. I need to ask about something else. You remember Officer Ryan Carter? A long pause followed. When Alvarez spoke, his tone was cautious. Ryan Carter? Yeah, I recall him. He took off for Mexico about 8 years ago. It was pretty abrupt. Ethan leaned closer to the phone. Detective Alvarez, this is Ethan Carter, Ryan's brother. I'm here looking for him. Everyone keeps saying Mexico, but that doesn't add up. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but that's what we heard. He said he was chasing a new dream, wanted a fresh start. No way, Ethan said firmly. Ryan lived for being a cop. He was damn proud of that badge. Said he'd carry it to his grave. Why's this coming up now? Alvarez asked, his voice tinged with concern. James laid out his run-in with Boone earlier, the odd accusations, and what he'd caught in the parking lot. We're tailing him now. Something's off, detective. You're following Sheriff Boone. James, that's a bad move. You need to. He's turning, Ethan broke in. They watched Boone's SUV slow and veer onto a dusty road leading to what looked like a weathered farmhouse, barely visible in the fading light. Detective, I'll call you back, James said, hanging up. He eased off the gas, scanning for a spot to pull over. About 100 yards past the farmhouse entrance, he found a patch of mesquite trees for cover. He cut the engine and lights. What's the plan? Ethan whispered. We're watching, James replied. Something's going down here. In the growing dusk, the farmhouse came into sharper view. It was run down but not deserted, lights glowed in the windows, and cars were parked out front. Boone's SUV had stopped partway up the drive, and another vehicle was rolling in from the opposite direction. Check it out, Ethan pointed. Several men climbed out of the new car. James counted 3 or 4 shadowy figures. They opened the back seat and dragged someone out. Even from afar, it was clear the person was tied up, stumbling as the men hauled them along. God, Ethan breathed. Is that person blindfolded? James strained his eyes, wishing for binoculars. The group moved to Boone's SUV, and with mounting dread, they saw the bound figure being shoved into the trunk. Boone didn't even step out of his vehicle. What in the hell is happening? Ethan's voice trembled. They watched as Boone's SUV pulled away from the farmhouse, continuing down the road. The other car spun around and headed back toward town. Call Alvarez now, James said. Ethan was already dialing. When the detective picked up, James grabbed the phone. Detective, we just saw Sheriff Boone take what looks like a kidnapped person. They stuffed someone tied up and blindfolded into his trunk at an old farmhouse off Highway 67. James, that's a heavy claim. Are you dead sure about what you saw? One pair of eyes can miss things, James said grimly. But 2 sets don't. Ethan saw it too. Ethan nodded, though Alvarez couldn't see. I confirm it. They moved someone from one car to Boone's. They were definitely restrained. Alvarez's tone turned all business. If this checks out, I'm issuing a bolo right now. Every unit will be on alert to stop Boone's vehicle. Do it, James urged. I'm sending units to your location, Alvarez said. If Boone's on that road, he's aiming for one of Alpine's few exits. We can set up roadblocks. Can we keep this quiet? James asked. So he doesn't catch on. That depends on how many of his pals are at dispatch, but it won't matter. The bolo will get him stopped. I'll oversee it myself. Alvarez paused. James, Ethan, it's getting dark. You two need to head back now. Let us take it from here. James turned the key, pulling back onto the road. If that's Ryan or Olivia in his trunk, I'm not backing off. Just move quick, detective. We'll stay out of trouble. James, be cautious, Alvarez said, and James cut the call. He floored the gas, keeping Boone's taillights in sight as night cloaked the Texas terrain. James kept Alvarez on speaker as they shadowed Boone's SUV through the darkening desert. The detective's voice buzzed through, directing units while staying connected. "He's making for the county line," James reported. But as the words left his mouth, Boone's brake lights flashed, and the SUV swerved onto another road. "He's changed course," Ethan said, urgency in his voice. "He's staying in town." Alvarez's tone was dark. "Someone at the station must have tipped him off about the bolo. Keep tailing him, but stay back." They drove another 10 minutes through increasingly barren land. Boone's SUV finally slowed, turning onto a rough dirt track leading to what seemed like an abandoned ranch. James could just make out the outlines of buildings against the night sky, a main house and a few outbuildings, including what looked like old barns. "Detective, he's pulled into a deserted ranch," James said, giving the coordinates. "Looks like the old Dawson place. It's been empty for years." "Units are on the way," Alvarez replied. "Do not go near those buildings, I repeat, do not approach." James pulled off the road about 200 yards from the ranch entrance, tucking behind some scrub brush. They watched as Boone's SUV stopped near one of the barns. In the faint light, they saw Boone step out and open the trunk. He struggled to lift the person inside, who was limp, either out cold or too weak to fight. He half carried, half dragged them toward the barn's shadowy doorway. "I've got to get closer," James said, reaching for the door. Ethan grabbed his arm. "No way, this is our limit." "You heard Alvarez. That could be Olivia in there," James said, his voice breaking. "Maybe," Ethan countered. "Or it could be a setup. We wait for backup." His grip was unyielding. "Please, James. We've made it this far. Don't do something that could get us killed." James's fists clenched, but he stayed put. The minutes dragged on like hours as they watched the barn, catching glimpses of flashlight beams flickering through cracks in the walls. Then, like phantoms in the night, police cruisers rolled in, no sirens, no lights, just dark shapes closing in on the ranch. Officers spilled out, swiftly encircling the buildings with practiced precision. "They're here," Ethan whispered. James and Ethan stepped out of the truck, only to be stopped by an officer who raised a hand. "Stay right here, folks, for your own safety." From inside the barn came sounds that chilled James's blood, cries of pain, scuffling, and a woman's voice pleading for help. "Move, move, move," someone barked, and officers stormed the barn. The next few minutes were pandemonium. Shouts, sounds of a fight, officers calling for more backup and medics. James edged forward despite the warning, Ethan at his side. Boone was dragged out in cuffs, his face twisted with fury. When he spotted James, his glare turned venomous. "You're gonna pay for this, Harris," he growled. "You don't know who you're messing with. You just sealed your own." "Quiet," an officer snapped, shoving him toward a patrol car. Another officer emerged from Boone's SUV, waving a phone. "Alvarez needs to see this," he shouted. "Boone's texts, they're talking about moving a woman out of town and planting bones." Alvarez arrived moments later, grabbing the phone and scrolling through it, his face growing grimmer by the second. He fixed Boone with a hard stare. "Care to spill who you're working with? These messages don't lie." Boone's jaw locked tight, not a word escaping. Ethan stepped up. "We know where he met them earlier, at that farmhouse." "I don't know the roads well," but James pulled out his phone, opening the GPS app. "Right here," he said, showing Alvarez the marked location. That's where the handoff happened. Right then, officers stepped out of the barn, steadying a frail woman between them. Even in the dim light, after 9 long years, James knew her instantly. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice catching. She was painfully thin, her clothes tattered and filthy, but she was breathing, alive. Medics swooped in as an ambulance screeched to a stop, its flashing red and white lights casting eerie glows across the scene. An officer scrolling through Boone's phone suddenly looked up, urgency in his voice. "Detective, we've got a new text. Coordinates just came through, says that's where they're stashing the bones." "Gotcha," Alvarez said, his face darkening. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, send multiple units and a SWAT team. We're hitting what looks like a drug smuggling ring." Glancing at Boone's phone again, he added, "The texts talk about drug payoffs and monthly kickbacks. I need another squad at these coordinates to catch suspects trying to bury remains." As officers geared up for the raid, Ethan rushed toward them, desperation in his eyes. "I'm going with you. If this ties back to that farmhouse, my brother could be there." "Sir, this is a high-risk op," an officer replied. "My brother's Officer Ryan Carter," Ethan pressed. "He might be caught up with these guys." The lead officer glanced at Alvarez, who gave a nod. "We all know Ryan. If he's there, we'll spot him. But you can't join the raid, Mr. Carter. It's too dangerous. We'll call you the second it's locked down." Ethan's shoulders slumped, his voice heavy. "I hope he's not there. I'd rather he's really in Mexico." James barely registered the conversation, his focus locked on the ambulance where Olivia was being tended to. She looked steadier now, and fluid dripping into her arm, medics monitoring her signs. When she saw him nearing, she tried to stand, ignoring the medics' protests. She wobbled, and James lunged to catch her. In an instant, she was in his arms, her face pressed into his shoulder, her frail frame trembling with sobs. "Dad," she murmured, her voice faint. "I knew you'd come for me. I knew you'd never stop looking." A medic spoke softly. "Sir, she's been drugged with some kind of sedative, but it's fading. She's endured severe trauma and needs hospital care right away." Alvarez had trailed James and now stood nearby, notebook in hand. Olivia turned to him, her eyes brimming with tears. "The sheriff," she started, her voice cracking. He abused me. They wanted to kill me at first, but he stopped them. Said to keep me alive for his visits." James's chest burned with fury, but he kept his tone gentle. "Who are they, honey?" "Drug runners. Juan Morales runs the show. They held me in a secret bunker inside an old grain silo at their farmhouse." She faced Alvarez. "Boone's dirty. He's been shielding their operation, burying investigations. They paid him monthly, and kept me alive as part of the deal. They called me his plaything." Alvarez scribbled furiously, his expression hard. "We'll take them all down, Miss Harris. Our teams are already closing in on their hideouts." The medic cut in softly. "We need to move her to the hospital now." James glanced at Ethan, fished his truck keys from his pocket, and tossed them over. "Take it as long as you need. I'm staying with her." Ethan caught the keys with a nod of gratitude. James climbed into the ambulance beside Olivia, clasping her hand as the medics worked. As the doors shut and they pulled away from the horrific scene, he started recounting the day's events, the truck's discovery, Boone's shady behavior, meeting Ethan, and the pursuit that led to her rescue. Olivia gripped his hand feebly. I want to tell the cops everything, she said. Once I'm treated, I want to make sure he's locked up for good. Alpine General Hospital's ER was a whirlwind of motion. James stood helplessly as the medical team rushed Olivia off for tests and care. He sank into a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, one that had borne the weight of countless anxious families. For the first time since that sheriff's cruiser rolled up to his ranch that afternoon, James had no task but to think. The anger he'd kept in check began to surge. 9 years. 9 years of his daughter's suffering while that crooked sheriff played the part of a caring lawman, faking investigations, feigning concern. The sterile hospital smell choked him. James stood abruptly, heading for the exit, craving fresh air. He pulled out the pack of cigarettes tucked in his jacket for emergencies. He'd kicked the habit years ago, but old crutches lingered. He was about to light one when a voice called, "Mr. Harris." James turned to see a doctor in scrubs approaching and quickly stashed the cigarette. "I'm Dr. Lee. I've been looking after your daughter. How's she doing?" The doctor's face was composed, but anger simmered beneath. "She's severely malnourished and underweight. There's evidence of repeated abuse, old breaks that didn't heal right, scars from restraints." He paused. "She's got infections in her reproductive system, including an STI, and respiratory problems, likely from long-term exposure to chemicals in the silo where drugs were stored." James's legs nearly buckled. He braced against the wall for support. "She's stable now," Dr. Lee added swiftly. "We've started antibiotics and nutritional therapy, but she'll need to stay here for at least a week, maybe more, for treatment." "Can I see her?" "Of course. She's in room 314 and asking for you." James followed the doctor through the hospital's winding halls. At the door, Dr. Lee paused. "She's endured horrific trauma, Mr. Harris. Her recovery will be a long road, physical, emotional, and mental." James nodded, his throat too tight for words. The doctor left, and James stepped inside. Olivia looked tiny in the hospital bed, and 4 in her arm, monitors beeping softly, but her eyes were sharp. When she saw him, she managed a faint smile. "Dad." He pulled a chair close to her bedside. "I'm right here, sweetheart." "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears spilling. "I'm sorry I didn't make it home that night." "No way," James said, taking her hand gently, careful of her fragility. "Don't you apologize. I'm the one who's sorry. I went looking for you that night, saw you were gone, but I thought maybe you'd camped out or gone into town. I never dreamed someone took you." His voice cracked. "If I'd called the cops that night instead of waiting till morning." "Enough," Olivia said, her grip tightening faintly. "If anyone's to blame, it's Boone. He was supposed to protect people, but he twisted his badge for evil." Her eyes blazed with surprising resolve. "He's the monster, Dad, not you." A knock at the door broke the moment. A young officer stepped in cautiously. "Sorry to interrupt. Detective Alvarez sent me to get Miss Harris's statement when she's ready." James stood, his protective instincts kicking in. "No offense, officer, but with Boone's betrayal and how sensitive this case is, I'd rather wait for Alvarez himself." The officer nodded, understanding. "I'll pass that along, sir." Hours ticked by. James dozed unevenly in the chair by Olivia's bed, stirring at her every movement or sound. Near midnight, Alvarez arrived, looking worn but resolute, with another officer toting recording gear. "Sorry for the wait," Alvarez said. It's been a grueling night of busts and questioning. I get it, James replied. Olivia propped herself up slightly. I'm ready to tell you everything about that night. Alvarez and his team set up the equipment, and Olivia began, her voice gaining strength. I was herding cattle that evening, like always. Took the truck out around 8 p.m. with feed, heading to our west grazing land. It was a clear night, easy to see. I was about to round up the cattle when I spotted lights in a dry gulch near an old, abandoned well site. She paused, steadying herself. It was a drug deal. Men were swapping packages between trucks. I didn't recognize them, but I knew I had to get out fast. I bolted for my truck, left the cattle behind, there was no time to herd them. But one of them saw me. Juan Morales. I tried to peel out, but he chased me in his pickup, lights off, running dark. He slammed into my truck from behind, forced me off the road. Before I could react, he yanked me from the cab, zip-tied my wrists, and blindfolded me. James's fists balled as she went on. I heard him radio someone, kept saying, "Sheriff, we've got a problem." That's when I knew it was Boone. He showed up at the farmhouse where they took me. I overheard them arguing about what to do. Morales wanted to kill me and dump the truck deep in the desert, but Boone, her voice faltered, he said he wanted me for himself. Told them to keep me alive. Morales called me a risk, but Boone reminded him how he'd covered their tracks, buried investigations. Said they owed him, keeping me alive and hidden for his pleasure, on top of the cash they were already paying. Alvarez's face was unyielding as he took notes. They locked me in a hidden bunker inside a grain silo at the farmhouse. I heard them plan to bury my truck. Boone told them about an old drilling site outside Marfa, said the pit was already there, just needed filling. She looked at James. After that, it's a haze. They shuffled me between hideouts over the years, kept me doped up most of the time. A nurse working for the cartel kept me alive, patched my wounds. They killed her last year for showing too much kindness. God, James muttered, his voice low. Alvarez looked up from his notes. Miss Harris, your story lines up with what Juan Morales spilled tonight. He admitted they used heavy rigs to fill that oil well with desert sand, working all night. Boone doctored the traffic cam footage to hide their tracks. James found his voice. What about Ryan Carter? He was in traffic enforcement. Was he in on it with Boone? Alvarez's face grew darker. We found Ryan at the farmhouse tonight. He's alive, but just barely. Seems Ryan got suspicious when Boone kept asking for specific traffic footage and seemed hell-bent on steering the investigation. When Ryan called him out, Boone had the cartel grab him. They faked his move to Mexico. Jesus, James breathed. Ryan's been forced to work in their drug lab for 8 years. He's got whip scars, old and fresh, and they mutilated his fingers and toes to keep him in line. Alvarez shook his head. He's here in the hospital, different ward. Ethan's with him. Will he pull through? James asked. Physically, yeah. Mentally, that's a tougher road. Alvarez pulled out his phone, showing photos. One more thing. We caught Morales's crew tonight at another site, burying bones mixed with women's clothes and boots like what Olivia used to wear. Olivia gasped. They were faking my death. Our forensics guy confirmed the bones are pig remains. Femurs and ribs can look human when broken down and decayed, common in Texas. Their plan was to smuggle you across the border tonight while planting fake evidence to make us think you were dead, closing the case for good. The gravity of how close they'd come to losing it all hung heavy in the room. After Alvarez and his team left with Olivia's full statement, James stayed by her side until she drifted into an exhausted sleep. He stood in the hallway, trying to process it all, when a familiar figure approached. Ethan Carter looked as drained as James felt, but relief shone in his eyes. "James," Ethan said, offering his hand. "I owe you big time. If we hadn't crossed paths at that bar, if you hadn't caught Boone's call, I'd never have found Ryan." James shook his hand. "He's alive. That's what counts." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. 8 years of hell, but he's still here. They stood in the quiet hospital corridor, two men linked by a chain of unlikely moments that had exposed a deep rot and saved two souls. "Alvarez filled me in," Ethan went on. "The pig bones, the plan to move Olivia tonight. We stopped it just in time." "We'll keep fighting," James said, his voice firm. "Make sure Boone and every last one of them pays for this." Ethan nodded. "Alvarez said state investigators are coming to tear through the whole sheriff's department, dig out any other corruption." They stood in shared silence, absorbing the night's truths. Sometimes evil hid behind a badge, cloaked in power. But tonight, two regular guys who wouldn't quit had dragged that evil into the open. "Thanks again," Ethan said, "for not letting go. For trusting your gut." James glanced back at Olivia's room. A dad doesn't abandon his daughter, and a brother doesn't give up on his brother. Ethan gave a sad smile. Damn right they don't. In the end, that simple truth outshone years of corruption and cruelty. Love and grit had triumphed where evil seemed untouchable. It wasn't a clean win, the scars would linger forever. But Olivia was alive. Ryan was free. And justice was finally on its way. The two men clasped hands again, bound by their shared determination to see this through, to make sure no other family endured what theirs had.